So in about, when I get the 2-minute warning, I'm going to introduce the session, and then we'll start, and a little Q&A, and then we'll have time at the end for you to ask questions. So we will go on for about 20-30 minutes, and then jot yourself a note about your own questions, and then you'll be able to come up and ask questions yourself. Okay, I want to welcome everybody today. I'm Maureen McMahon. I'm the Deputy Superintendent for Strategic Initiatives and Academics. And I want to really take time to say thank you for coming today. Thank you for participating in this, what is an inaugural event for us. We have an association with Anne Arundel Medical Center, but we also have a community of many, many folks in the medical profession who focus on our youngest learners, and they focus on them as our youngest people, right? And we know if we have healthy young people coming to us, we have a better chance of helping them be successful young learners. So today we have an opportunity to bring these medical professionals to the table to actually learn from them. What are they seeing out there in their practices? What are they experiencing with the young population that they see, and also our young parents who are coming with these youngsters? Okay, so I'll start with Dr. Schneider. I'm wondering if you can tell us, we are seeing more and more learning and behavior challenges in our schools. What are you seeing in your youngest patients, and do you have any insights as to what's going on there?
Well, perhaps just by the numbers, the primary behavioral challenges we're seeing include ADHD, which you see as well in the school system, and we're diagnosing it early in children. Probably counts to 8 to 10% of the population, more disabling in some kids than others. Maybe beyond that, some anxiety diagnoses from separation anxiety disorder, social mutism, generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and we're seeing that in our youngest of kids as well. And then a lot of kids with mood dysregulation disorder, which is sort of a irritability syndrome that persists and associated with lots and lots of temper tantrums. But probably the greatest majority of the first two, which is ADHD and kids with an anxiety disorder of some sort.
Anybody want to add to that? And any insights to what you're seeing over time? Historically, are we seeing changes?
I think in addition to some of the dysfunctional things, because we were joking over there that we're sort of preaching to the choir half the time, like the parents that come in and they know what to ask. They'll say, I have a kid who has separation disorder. I can't leave him at the school. And those are the kids you can help. It's the kids that come in and the parents, I don't know if you guys see this more, but the parents come in and they are sitting in the room for a checkup, which is not that common. You don't see them that often for a checkup. I'm talking about a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old. You see them once a year, and they're on their cell phone or they're on their computer, and they're kind of half paying attention to the checkup. And that's a kid who, by the way, is not doing very well at school, and they're not that engaged with their kids. And if you go to a lot of the different parties, they're talking to you and they're also on their cell phone. So this communication gap, I think, where people aren't sitting down at the dinner table and talking to their kids anymore. There's a TV on, there's a cell phone in one hand, a TV on, and the phone's ringing. And the kids sort of at the table, but they're not engaged in the family life as much as maybe when, I'm old, so when I grew up, you didn't have a TV and a cell phone and everything, which shocks patients all the time. They're like, you didn't have a cell phone growing up? I'm like, no. So this whole new technological explosion has been a very big plus in some circumstances, but I think it's really broken up communication. So if you get a kid with ADD and the family's sitting there eating dinner and they're also, doing all the ADD stuff with the computer and the iPad and the iPod, and by the way, these kids have iPods and iPads, instead of sitting at the dinner table, finishing their meal, talking about how their brother hit them today in school and and then the parents had an opportunity to say, well, you shouldn't hit your brother. We don't hit in this house. I mean, there's none of that opportunity anymore. So everything's squished into a big, all day long, wake up and start hitting all the technological things. And I don't mean to blame everything on technology. I'm using this as one example of many in the 21st century that's rapidly changed family life and therefore changed the opportunity for families to convince their children how to do things a certain way. And then these kids go to school and you get them and they don't have that discipline, that daily routine, that sleep pattern that they should have because they're sleeping on their iPad. I'm sort of stuffing a lot into it. I don't mean to be a pig, but...
And I think the overscheduling of activities also plays into that. As much as the technology ruins any family time, everybody is running to this activity and that. People are out of the house 7 days a week. They're doing their homework in the car instead of sitting down at a desk, learning how to focus and do their homework sitting down. Homework becomes secondary to their sports activities or their dance activities or their horseback riding or, everything that kids are doing at such younger and younger ages, which is probably not developmentally necessary or necessarily appropriate. But if it's good for 15, it's good for 12. If it's good for 12, it's good for 10. If it's good for 10, it's good for 5. And so I think that has to impact on school readiness and focus as well.
Yeah, I think also that parents tend to work more than say our parents, and so there really are less opportunities. Not just because the kids are disengaged, but also they just, parents are tired, and I know several kids now that I used to coach in baseball, and they remarked on this back when they were they were very good at baseball, but unfortunately that meant eating hot dogs and burgers and potato chips pretty much every night of the season because they were very good at baseball. So but if this was kind of family bonding time as well.
So you bring up an issue that is near and dear to a lot of our hearts out there, and it's the nutrition piece. Are you seeing a difference over the last, let's say, 5 years in what youngsters are coming to you with respect to health and nutrition?
One of the problems is that, we're discovering kids who are, essentially, they're obese basically at 4 and 5 years of age. And I have a type 2 diabetic, a 14-year-old type 2 diabetic right now. So there's, and some of those, I think part of it is that parents are really distracted because there's just so much to do. And I think the technology plays into it because I think that employers expect us all to be available after we get home from work. And I think that's been this part of the technology that people don't really talk about. Of course, couldn't you log on last night? Did you look at your emails last night? It's like, no, I'm not at work. And before you could say, well, I'm not at work. I can't do that. But now there's a little excuse for that. But yeah, anyway, so people are not eating 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. There's meal times are not about family, for family get-togethers. They're really about, getting a task accomplished, like feed you. And that can become, takes away a lot of what meal times were about when we were kids.
Well, I would argue the birth to 7 crowd are showing improvements in their desire for healthy eating. I think that there's been such a media blitz on obesity and all the rest. I think that 12 and 13-year-olds may be beyond our ability to change at this point, but people coming in now, you find a lot of kids who aren't eating as much processed food. Families are making their own baby food. They are very, very focused on healthy eating, and sometimes to the detriment of just normal life. Everything doesn't have to be locally sourced and organic in order to go in your 1-year-old's mouth. But I do think there's a hope that people are getting away from some of the processed foods that are the convenience foods. And there's certainly wider variety now of fast foods. If you are going to stop after a game, you could stop at, I don't know, Chick-fil-A is maybe a little bit better than McDonald's. Chipotle's a little bit better than that. Subway is better than all of that. So there are other options. It's not just McDonald's. Certainly when I was growing up, we never didn't stop at McDonald's after a game. I mean, we brought our $5 and we ate at McDonald's. That was the highlight of our sports activities. So I do think there's an improvement coming down the pike. I think our birth to 7-year-olds are going to be better eaters than our 7 to 15-year-olds are.
But as a group, they're also can be quite picky, and every kid needs to be individualized. So I think one of the challenges we have in our offices on a regular basis at their physicals is to discuss their nutrition and try to come up with unique ways to help them eat better and find creative things they can do to make their kids get groups from different food groups. It's easy to say eat 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, but getting kids to eat that is very, very difficult. So finding creative ways for parents to help their kids who are eating poorly to eat better as time goes on. We're now seeing something the tip of the iceberg of nutritional deficiencies that we probably have been there all along, but vitamin D is a hot topic now. Many of the kids who we test for vitamin D are very commonly deficient in it, and it has to do with the decreased intake of milk, the increased use of sunscreens, we're getting less exposure to the sun, and finding ways to make sure that they get enough of that. And the implications of vitamin D deficiency by itself have to do with a whole bunch of behavioral things as well as other medical conditions too.
And lastly, I have to mention school lunch, or maybe firstly, I don't know. But, I generally tell people to pack their lunch, not to eat school lunch. I mean, that's a comment right there. Because the kids go in and they get the French fries and Chick-fil-A, the chicken patties that I don't know if they're really chicken. And, I know that they did take soda out of the schools. They took the candy machines out of the school. That's been a big improvement. And I still go back to the comment that there's something good about a kid sitting down with the family, either at night or in the morning, and helping pack their lunch. I don't care if they're 5 or 6 or 7. I know this is all the way down to 3, but being part of the decision making for what goes in their lunchbox or what goes on their dinner table, I think it's still a good thing for a small child to be in the kitchen when you're, starting to serve your dinner or making your dinner, because one, it gives them culpability. And you're right, Don, no kid wants to put the broccoli on the tray, but they help make it and they have to put it on their tray and they kind of have to eat it. And I think all of those things contribute to how they view themselves in the family and in the community. It's not just the meal. And I know it's been said by all 3 of the other panelists that eating is a time that you talk and communicate. I wish that during the nutrition part of their day that everything else closed down, that people did sit down, look at each other, and communicate. I think it would make a big difference. I feel like a lot of times when the kids go to school, one of their biggest issues is they don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to talk to the teacher. They don't know how to voice that they've lost something on the, they don't know how to ask for help. There's a lot of helplessness in our children now. And it's not just a helicopter parent, it's all the kids. They feel sort of overwhelmed and helpless, and maybe that contributes to what Dr. Schneider mentioned earlier, and that there's an increase in anxiety.
It's interesting that you started speaking about the anxiety pieces. We certainly see it in our schools. I'm looking out here. Some of our people from counseling are here, and we're seeing stress in younger students, greater and greater stress in younger and younger students. So what advice do you give parents who have a youngster 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, really with stress that you diagnose as probably being helped by the family dynamic? I mean, what do you say to them? Anybody?
I started discussing diagnosable conditions. I think that a good portion of the population has some level of anxiety anyway. In some people, I think it serves a positive purpose. If you, as I say to my patients, if you worry about Friday's test and you study harder, you do better. If you worry so much you can't study, then it's a problem. But even short of a diagnosable condition, I think there are stressors, especially in young children like this, on a regular basis that tends to be more short-term. Parental discord, parental divorce, separation, new babies in the house, remarriage, new families, new siblings, deaths in the family. It just goes on and on and on. And the period of adjustment leads to kids showing symptoms of anxiety, and that shows up in their schoolwork and in their school performance and their sleep at nighttime, which has even a more critical impact on their school performance.
I think also with young parents who often don't have a parent themselves nearby, they really are making a lot of stuff up, for themselves in terms of how to discipline kids. And I work with families very closely about this issue, but I'm a big believer in there's certain things you can't do for another person, which is like determine how much sleep they need, help them get to sleep, or help them remain asleep. You can't be involved in that. So as soon as a child is able to do that, at 4 months I start talking to parents about putting them down, sleepy but awake. But it's really the first time that parents, they relinquish a responsibility to the child. And sometimes when a parent says, my kid still sleeps with me and he's 2, I don't immediately jump on them, but it makes me wonder, well, what else are you not letting, because you're sending this message to this kid that basically you can't handle that. And I think the other issue comes with food. And, so the rule in our office is they have to try a new food 20 times before you can say they don't like it. And because you're just not, people don't really know how to calibrate how much they need to do for the other person, for this child. They often overdo it, and they themselves, they'll, often parents are telling me, he won't eat blank, 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 blank. And it's sort of, well, of course, now absolutely he won't, after you just told me what he won't eat. So we work on it as being more of a, this is more of a, yes, of course, kids need to, have establish their control. But if you if you kind of react when they talk about food, they immediately go, oh, well, that's a powerful thing to say. I don't like broccoli. I'm going to say it again. And so that's what if we could try to work with parents to help them understand where the reward system comes from for kids, that it's not the same as in adults, and that it's really the coin of the realm is attention.
So, do you want to add to that at all?
The only other thing I was going to say is everyone knows that the only way you can help an anxious child is to help their anxious parent or parents. So you can do everything in the classroom if you've got an anxious kid, but if the child returns to a household where someone with severe anxiety or even moderately severe anxiety is not treated, you haven't put a dent in the child's anxiety. And so I think sometimes as pediatricians, and Dr. Snyder had mentioned that earlier on, we're in there trying to teach them, but the parents need help. And they will admit, a lot of them don't, and then you can't do anything, but they will admit that they have anxiety and they need help. But we have a stuck mental health system. And with all due respect to the school psychologists, what can you do for the parents half the time? These are people that won't even come into the school, a lot of them, or they don't know where to go for help. They don't know how to ask for it.
That's interesting that you mentioned the parents. Certainly we engage with the parents more frequently with our young learners than we do as they get older. And we struggle with those same things, right? That we see more and more parents who are a little bit more demanding on their children and more demanding on the school system. That's not negative or positive, but that's an observation. We're seeing more of that. We're also seeing the opposite, disengagement from school. And you started talking initially about the technology piece and then the working piece. And so the family dynamic has changed. Do you see a difference? Certainly, I know as pediatricians, you start them very young and then you take them all the way through, in many cases, 18 years old or older. 26, is that right? Wow. So are you seeing a difference in siblings, where you have a number of siblings in a family, where you have some young ones now, but you have the older folks? Are you seeing a dynamic difference in a family that's changed over a decade or two that you've actually worked with? Do you see any of that going on?
I think it's more generational than family. I think you have parents who sort of have a more effective parenting strategy, and they maintain those strategies for all of them. Certainly, I think any family with more than 2 kids, the younger ones get away with more. They are allowed to do more things. That was true when I was growing up as the oldest of 4. We really felt my parents had let it slack by the time they got to the youngest ones. But the overall parenting strategy is the same for most couples that remain together for all their kids. I do think generationally it's changed enormously, so that the parents who became parents 15 years ago versus the parents who are becoming parents today are very different. I see a lot of older moms, women who have waited until their mid-30s, late 30s, early 40s to have their first baby. I feel there's a lot more intentional parenting. People have set out to do this very perfectly, and they're going to parent exactly how all the blogs say you should parent. And that can make our jobs very difficult, and probably make your jobs incredibly difficult, because everybody's an expert. So everyone can go on the internet and read about the best way to encourage your child to be a self-motivated learner, what to do with the shy child. Everyone's an expert. And so I find very much there are families that are convinced of how to do things, and they don't necessarily want an expert's opinion. I do think in the school system there's been a huge shift into parent and kid against the school, whereas it used to be parent and school against the kid. So the parent and the teacher work together to help the child. Now it's the parent comes to the child's defense and blames the school for any, loss of an A. And I think that's been a huge paradigm shift, both in medicine and in education over the last 20 years.
And then there's a complete other demographic, which is I've been in practice for 30 years in Severna Park, and I now get a lot of single parents. And no offense, but it's usually single mothers. The dad's in the room for the first couple of checkups, and then they disappear. And then you have a 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and young women who are either alone or they come in the next time with another fella, and the other fella is now in their life and he's trying to raise them. And there's a lot of really, like Dr. Escobosa said, really trying to figure it out because they're still growing up themselves. So they don't know how to, they love the child, they just don't know how to teach the kids. So the first thing we do, we're all in this together, where they come in our room and they go, I don't know what I'm doing. That's not what they say, though. So when you're starting to walk through the nutrition and the sleep and the emotional component, all that we do now at checkups, right? You have to ask them how they're doing. Are they going back to school? How do they manage the 5 a.m. feeding after a 12 o'clock crying spell for an hour? Because it's only them. And their parents are often, housing them, but putting them somewhere in the house, usually the basement, interestingly enough, as their space to raise a kid. And their comment or their mental state is, you have that baby and you raise him. We love him. We'll help you with it financially, but you raise him. So this kid is, I know this has been going on for decades and decades and decades, but I think that is a real increase in what I'm seeing in my practice. And some of the kids are coming in with, 17, 18 years old with the second baby, and they haven't quite accomplished what they wanted with the first baby because life is just kind of happening. So, it would be really not, I use infants and toddlers and Child Find all the time. I rapidly get them involved. I know almost all their names because, I'm calling them and asking for help. I need help. And they'll go, is a child delayed? No, not necessarily, but this is a really at-risk family and I don't know who else to call.
It's actually a blessing. I have a patient who, really complicated patient, and somewhere along the line, he has a gastrointestinal problem, and but this is the only kid I've ever met has a gastric tube who's chubby. So there's right there, these kids, so this kid has no problem absorbing nutrients and so forth. So, but luckily he was delayed. So I suddenly had the ability to have a number of people really involved in this child's home. He's 4, and because now Child Find could be in the home, and so suddenly it opened this family up to all these services, and then I don't know how it all happened, but the dad is back in the picture, which complicates things a little bit. But I think it's because he perceives that there's hope for this family, and that he's wants to, there's some kind of there's more of there's less. They don't go up to Hopkins once a week anymore, so there's a little bit more stability in the family because they required. I was able to get them, ostensibly developmental help, but really ultimately it became this a way of giving this structure to this family.
Good ending piece. Dr. Snyder? No?
I wouldn't understate the importance of young children like that, either through Child Find or any preschool program. Preschool is probably the most important stepping stone to quality education thereafter. And I have many patients choose not to send their kids to preschool or can't. And I think it's a place where they learn unbelievable social skills that gets them ready for kindergarten. They develop a relationship with an authority figure, which I think is very important also, that's other than their parent, and really sets them up for great success. And those kids who start out in kindergarten without that experience, I think are a step behind, have difficulty. Many of them are resilient and do great, but the other ones sort of hang on, having problems in the years thereafter.
So another topic that some of the audience members who signed up mentioned to us to bring up was a topic of growing allergies. I don't know if that's actually what you're seeing in the practices you have or not, but what we're seeing is lists of allergies that come with students now to elementary school, and cautionary elements associated with each one of those allergies. We have tables in our cafeteria now, no peanuts, et cetera, et cetera. I'm wondering what you're seeing and what you're thinking about it and what you're offering the community, the parents that you see and the students that you see.
Well, two different levels of allergies. There's the kids who have life-threatening allergies, or at least have systemic reactions to allergens when they're exposed. But the number of allergies themselves, I think the increase from the late 90s to mid single-digit 2000s was a 18% increase in the number of allergies documented, which is a significant amount. So we're a more allergic population, or the things we're exposed to are more allergenic or induce allergies more so, and that's one of the suspicions with peanuts, and that they may be have mutated to the point where they're more allergenic, and that's why we're having more problems with them. And then your challenges in the school are the kids who have significant systemic reactions, whether it be single organ system, hives, and things like that, or downright anaphylaxis, what to do with them. That's what the fear is, and that's why we have all those separate tables. But we're just finishing a season where allergies play a role in making kids uncomfortable throughout the day, pollen season, giving them congestion, hard to control it, leaving them with very poor sleep at nighttime, which has another, I think, significant impact on their performance this time of year. So it's not, if it is spring fever, it probably is related to pollen.
So we're seeing many students suffering from, the seasonal allergies, certainly, and then the food allergies. But we have many, many more students on special diets than we've ever seen in the past. So part of our school lunch program over the years, we're moving to more and more and more healthy lunches. We're now Taste the Rainbow is part of our attempt to really help institute the notion of taking a risk and eating foods that you're not used to seeing, et cetera. But we also now see many, many more students come with special needs associated with their diet. Are you seeing that as well?
And you're speaking specifically of gluten-free diets?
Gluten-free diets, some special allergies to wheat, the specials go on now. The lists are really very long. And yeah.
So there's two schools of thought on gluten specifically. So there's clearly a subpopulation of people who have celiac disease, which is an inability it's an allergy to any gluten-containing product. And that is diagnosed only by biopsying the intestine. There's a huge population of people who believe that gluten causes them symptoms, and there's enough people that feel better on a gluten-free diet that certainly we're not arrogant enough to think that there's no scientific basis there. We just don't know what it is yet. I certainly would never tell someone who wanted to go on a gluten-free diet not to, just because they think it makes them feel better. But could I honestly recommend it for a kid with ADD? No, I could not. I don't believe that is the answer to fixing ADD. But there are certainly people who claim that child's ADD has disappeared on a gluten-free diet. I think that the two populations make it very difficult for schools, because one population truly has organic disease that cannot have gluten. The other population is more of a belief system and a choice, a personal choice. And that impacts the school's ability to provide a cost-effective lunch program. It makes it very difficult. So gluten is a difficult one.
And there are a lot of non-MD doctors. I don't know, without going into all the different designations that they come with a lot of 2 or 3 digit, ND, et cetera, after their name. And they come and they say, well, my other doctor. And I'm like, you have another doctor? And they're like, yeah, they gave me this diet and they give me and there's all these weird, Latin names on it of supplements, et cetera. And I know that, it looks like gobbledygook. It doesn't mean anything to me. And they'll ask my expert opinion. And it's unfair because I don't know that there is an expert opinion on it. And so you feel a little uncomfortable because they mean well. They're well-meaning parents, but they're often the same parents that want you to sign a note that says that their kid can't eat anything red, orange, blah, 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 blue dye, because when the kid has it, they become psychotic. Et cetera. So it's really hard on our end because we don't want to support that type of non-scientific backed request. On the other hand, there's a little bit of an antagonism among not just the parents and the teachers. Obviously, there's always a little antagonism with these kind of folks, but in our end too. So we're sitting there looking at this form to fill out and we're like, I don't feel comfortable signing this form. I don't know who gave you the supplements. I don't know what they are. Oh, just look them up. They're on this website. Well, you look up the website and it's ridiculous. So you're like, I'm sorry, but this website doesn't look like something that I feel comfortable supporting. So we basically share the same families. I mean, that's what I'm saying to you, is if you get something that doesn't really make sense to you, it's probably because it doesn't really make sense. If you get a child, and we have them, I have a child in my practice that came in anaphylaxis, shot her up with 4 doses of epi, started a line, counting for 9/11 to get there because she had eaten a piece of cheese at a friend's house and went full out boom. And they brought him into my office in the waiting room. So she fortunately did well, but she has anaphylaxis to milk, egg, fish, peanuts, nuts. She shouldn't even be on the planet based on what she's allergic to, and truly, seriously allergic to them. So she sits alone at her table a lot of times because she's got the table with all the, food allergies. And that hurts her mother's, her mother gets all worked up, like my daughter's always alone at the table. But, I could understand it. I mean, people don't want to send in a lunch with absolutely nothing in it. No cheese, no peanut butter, no anything really. No egg, no bread, blah, blah, blah. So they do exist. I implore you to keep an open mind. One thing I will ask all of you in the room is if you have a kid and they have an anaphylactic history, and the substitute teachers, I do feel like they should be told when they're substituting in a class where you have an extremely allergic kid that you will not hurt that kid if you give them an EpiPen. That if you pick up that EpiPen and you hit them and you give them that EpiPen, you will save their life. And if it was not really anaphylaxis, who cares? Doesn't hurt them at all. It's harmless.
Thank you.
So one of my colleagues thought that this is this is lore at the office. One of my colleagues didn't realize that he or she was was using actually a live. I thought he was using a sample, a trainer, EpiPen trainer, and he actually gave himself an epinephrine shot with it because it wasn't. The trainer. But so we know that this is not going to harm anyone to do it. Actually, one of the things I'm really excited about, one of the products is a product called Auvi-Q, which looks different than the EpiPen. EpiPen's looks like a thick pencil, but this looks more like a small square, and it talks to you. It tells you what to do. And I think that one of the problems is people, obviously they're afraid of giving the kid a shot. And so then they're uncomfortable because they don't know exactly how to do it. Well, this thing just tells you what to do, so it's very nice.
Well, I want to give a chance to the audience. Any questions out there? I know that we had many questions that drove some of what I asked today, but any questions that just please step to the microphone and feel free to ask a question while you're. Okay, there's someone, and then.
I wanted to just ask a follow-up to 2 of the things that you had mentioned, the first of which was the technological explosion, and the second of which was the overscheduling activities. Are you able to provide an estimate as to what you think is an appropriate level I'm dealing with 6-year-old twins, so I don't really know, how much time they should have on their Kindles for like videos and games, and then, what would be an appropriate amount of extracurricular activities at that age. They'll be going into first grade, and we are a very active family. But, you've made some really valid points. I think there's some changes I need to make in our family, but I'd like some guidance. I don't really know what is appropriate for that age.
The AAP recommends no more than 2 hours of screen time a day, and that's every screen. So TVs, computers, Kindles, and books are harder if you're only reading books on a Kindle, and there's a lot of debate about is that appropriate for the developmental ages that they're being used for or not. I think if you're reading, that's a little bit different. But 2 hours a day for any sort of gaming, as well as watching, is the recommended. And that's goes by very, very quickly. So I have very, very few patients. I have son that doesn't abide by those rules in my own house. So no matter how hard you try to do, you just try to do the best you can and try to get to that 2 hour a day limit. And I would argue for the, and this is more of a personal rather than an AAP recommendation, I don't think kids should play more than one sport each season, and they should play a different sport each season until they're at least 11 or 12. It's very hard to resist the club mentality that exists these days, much past 11 or 12, but it has become ridiculous, and that many 7-year-olds play travel soccer, they play travel baseball, everything is a year-round sport now, and that is just not good for their bodies or their social activities. They become very socially isolated with only the lacrosse kids, only the baseball kids, and I very much resent that you almost can't make the choice by the time they're 10 or 11. If they're not playing club, they're not competitive in any way, shape, or form. So at 6, you still have some time.
So do you have can you put like an equivalent to hours for that as well, or
Most
days
of the
per week?
rec leagues tend to be 2 practices a week. Often at 6, they're 1 practice a week and 1 game. So most of the practices don't run more than an hour. I think personally, as a family, you have to set limits. We for a long time just refused to play on Sundays. We thought it was ridiculous. They were playing sports 7 days a week, and we just wouldn't do Sunday activities. I don't play in 20-degree weather, and again, my kids are older now, so we can't set those limits quite the same. But I don't think a 7-year-old should play lacrosse when it's raining and it's 20 degrees on a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. I just wouldn't go. and not everybody feels that way. Not everybody feels that they can make those choices. And in fact, I have to be honest, my husband has helped me be better about that. I'm like, we made a commitment to the team. At some point, you have to, as a parent, overrule what the team is doing and decide for yourselves as a family what you think are good limits. But I'm a fan of 1 or 2 days a week with maybe a weekend game. That's a reasonable amount of activity for a kid for a 1 sport season.
Okay, so those were just 2 follow-up questions that I had that were, basically motivated by what you have all spoken about. But my personal question that I brought with me today might be a little bit complex. Maybe you can try to break it down so that it's not as overwhelming. But I have twins. They're polar opposites. They're not identical. They're fraternal. And there's a lot of, I would say, like, it almost seems like there's a pressure because one seems to excel on things easier. Like one has to work harder, to keep up with, I guess you could say. And it's like the frustrating thing that I'm having is that I'm seeing that the one who finds things more difficult is developing like a self-defeating kind of like complex where he'll just, if something's not easy to him, he'll just give up. And it's, even though he's very young, I don't want to see this continue into, teenage adulthood where I'm now a quitter. Like if something isn't easy to me, and I just had his parent teacher evaluation and he tested above average in math and reading. However, it's always a battle for him to do work that he finds complicated. So I don't know if it's a laziness. I don't know if it's an anxiety, which you've brought forward today. So as a parent, I'm just very concerned. I only mention the twin aspect because I don't know if that plays into it. However, they're in different classes at school. So it's not like you can blame it on, that you're brother is better at something because you're in different classes. So I can understand maybe at home with sports, things like that, it can be frustrating, but I'm just trying to find a way to build up his confidence so that, you know, he doesn't just drop out of things that he feels challenged by than things that he should be able to do. So I know that sounds very complicated, but maybe you can.
I'm going to take this one because I'm a twin.
Okay. Thank you.
And I have 7 brothers and sisters. So, first of all, your kids are born very different. And you tend to always call them, well, in my family, we were the twins. And then everybody else had a name. And I think we were lumped very much together, and my parents were very dedicated to treating us the same. And I think that was a mistake, very well-meaning, because they want to make sure that they showed us the same amount of love, which is very different than what you're addressing. My twin sister she works globally. She's around the world. She does a lot of very big things. I have sort of a small job compared to hers in the way our family thinks of it now. But growing up, she was a very outgoing one and I was a shy one. And we were often discussed at the table. Well, Faith's a shy one. Allie, tomorrow you do this. And, you know, there was a lot of that type of stuff. I think it's a dangerous place to go with twins because it's easy to do it. You know, like, well, he's taller. How much taller? Put him back to back. That happened to me all the time. So that comparison thing, it's impossible not to do it. But maybe what you can do is, because it sounds like one of your kids is very talented. Do you have more than twins?
No.
Okay. Kind of focus on the person that you're seeing struggle, see what their strengths are, kind of separate them in your mind completely, which is very hard to do, and really act like you have one kid. The other kid's sort of sailing, so act like you have one kid and see what that child likes. It might not be baseball, football, whatever this fellow wants. Really focus on that. Maybe he's the bookworm. I was the bookworm. I was the one that liked to go to the library and sit for hours in the library, that type of thing. I don't know if that's... I'm trying not to give you all the things that maybe he's good at, because you might find that it might be a guitar or something, but it might be much more cerebral than it is physical. Or if he's good in math and English, is that what you said? You know, maybe he's also good in art and he doesn't know it, but kind of go after like his focus, date him a little bit, you know, take him out, go do something that he kind of wants to do by himself, which is also hard to do when you have a job and a husband that, you know, and another little fellow to take care of. But maybe it's not a bad idea to sort of date him and pick his brain and see what he particularly likes to do.
I think, you know, our kids were so different from each other. We had, you know, this extroverted kid, you know, our older son, he's 20, and he's in college to become a screenwriter, which means he's going to live with us forever. No. And then the other one's much more concrete. And one of the things that's really nice working with parents is you know, kids are so individual and it's so much fun watching them, you know, progress through their different years, but their temperament remains the same. You know, it's really interesting. You know, we call one of our sons is a pleaser and the other one's a non-pleaser. I mean, just sort of, you know, we try not to kind of, you know, doom them to that, you know, description for the rest of their lives, but that's the general trend, you know, and so we tend to, you know, see them and they each have different strengths, but I think when I was listening to you, I was thinking, you know, it's so hard to answer a question like this in the absence of, you know, seeing your children. And I think that, you know, with some parents, I'll say, you know, they're different. Try to find different things, you know, like just. I think that was wonderful advice Dr. Hackett gave. But then if you're coming back next year with the same concern, I'd say, well, he probably has a learning difference, which is my way of saying he might have a learning difference that requires more attention than just what you can do at home. And which means just having psychological testing, that's what they call it, but educational testing. And basically you can discover kids, are they 6?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, so sometimes you can discover some learning differences. You can discover sometimes, you know, a very smart ADDer will often present that way, where they're not really behind when they're 6, but they just have, and I have my model for ADD here, by the way. you know, they have to kind of spend a lot of energy blocking out noise in the environment, and that just, you know, this isn't really true, but I just say to parents, that knocks off 20 IQ points right there off your kid, having to work that hard to get rid of all that noise. So if you were asking me this a year from now, when we had this initial discussion, at that point, or 6 months from now, I might you know, point you to where you can go to have them, you know, just assessed educationally.
Thank you.
I'll finally say that when one sibling is very successful and the other one's not, and the other one gives up with significant frequency, there's nothing that drives us as parents more nuts than when our kids give up on something and our reaction's always over the top. You signed up for lacrosse. You wanted it the whole time. You went to the first practice. Now you don't want to go anymore, and they get a ton of attention. I think that a lot of times when kids give up on something, maybe not as important as math and science, whatever you said, we need to just express our disappointment and not come back with long lectures and lots of berating about how important it is to keep on trying and try harder and harder. He's looking for that extra attention that the other child gets very naturally because he's so successful.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I do want to do a wrap up here and say, well, Dr. Escobosa, you brought a model. Do you want to share that with us a little bit? Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
I have a lot of patients with ADD. I just find it so fascinating. But in any case, so trying to explain to parents, you have to. Often there's a parent who doesn't have ADD and the kid who does, and so I try to engage the child in helping me describe to this presumably non-ADD parent what it's like to have attention deficit disorder. And so lots of stuff I've thrown out a bunch of stuff over the years. Some of it has stuck. One of them that I copied from somebody was telling a kid they have a race car brain and bicycle brakes, and what the medications do is just give you better brakes. And that's worked really well but with some of the kids that are more visual, if you tell them this is because I get this from the adult literature, 80% of the time when an adult complains of being distractible, 80% of the time they have ADD in some studies. So it's really, because adults don't go around saying that. So if you're distractible, that means that all the thoughts in your head have the same importance. So I put this on the table and I say, this is the teacher talking, this is the kid behind you talking, and this is the fact that you're a little bit hungry right now. And it's all in there, in that noise. And what non-ADDers can do is they can actually get rid of that noise, all of that noise, and of course, and their mind is able to kind of stay on the most important stimuli in the room. And this is, by the way, what ADD medications help you do. So that's my model. And of course, now it's all torn up because my kids play with it.
So what I want to do is thank everyone. I can't tell you how much we appreciate this. Our belief is that we need to understand more about what you're seeing in your practices, because even some of the things you mentioned today, I think, will impact what we're doing in the classroom. Sometimes we get very, very focused on these young people as learners, very, very focused about the fact that they're not learning to the level that we'd like them to. They're all about them as achievers, and actually what's true is they're young people, and they have to live out there in the big world, and they're living with families that have all kinds of stressors in the natural family setting. And what's also very, very true that we have to remind ourselves about is what's normal for one child isn't normal for the next child. And so I think you've helped us today ground us again in some of the natural norms of what it means to be a child.
Can I ask a question to the audience? Because this is something that I have noticed, and I see some familiar faces. But I don't know, 30 years ago, I could literally pick up the phone and call a teacher, and they'd call me back, and we could talk about the kid and chat. And, I'd say, well, look, I'm a little concerned about some depression in addition to, not just some learning issue, but I see this starting to really impact, just have a normal conversation like I'm sitting in the cafeteria with you. that's very hard to do now. I can leave messages. I get a call back from somebody that I haven't gotten a form filled out, which I understand, and then sometimes the form's filled out, but when I call, and I've been to a couple of IEP meetings in the last few weeks, because it's the end of the year wrap up, and they, these are really, you guys get some really sick, complicated kids. I mean, they're really complicated for me. They have epilepsy, they have, these food allergies, they have balance problems. Kids are surviving pretty bad things. They're surviving the NICU. They're surviving, I hate to use the word technology, but it's there, right? We're 21st century. They're surviving when they would have died years ago. But when they survive, they have a lot of, to use Dr. Escoboso's little nail thing, they've got lots of holes all over. And so the connect the dots aren't A to Z anymore. They're not necessarily so mentally challenged they belong in a special ed school, but they're also mainstreamed in a big classroom, and there's a lot of things that they miss, and it's not medication related. I can't give them a pill because it's not really ADD. There are holes missing in their head. And I feel really terrible for the teachers that have them. So I'm like, I need to go in there and tell them when the kid might be affected by their seizure meds. I need to go in and tell them when they get seasonal allergies, how it affects them. And I found that at my 2 recent IEP meetings, because I used to go and, hi, Dr. Hack, but there's like, I'm sat at the front of the table and everyone's down the aisle and everyone's sort of kind of doing this, which is very different than it was. I'm sort of not an advocate for the patient or like holding your hand. And of course I'm trying to hold your hand because I'm sitting there going, I don't know how you guys teach this kid. And if anybody can comment on that, because really we're in this with you. I mean, we really are. We get a lot of calls. We get a lot of after hours. My 5 o'clock day ends at 8 or 9 sometimes because I've got the whole family and the grandmother and the cousins in the room trying to explain it to me. And we would like to help you. We're not antagonistic.
Lucia Martin's one of our counseling experts. And then Pam Corson, I don't know if you would like to join her at the mic as well.
We do. Is it on? I don't know. Okay, so we do have to have permission. Parental permission to talk, but I think it's helpful to identify with the parent a point person at the school to make that initial contact. If a student has some learning differences and perhaps has a special ed, an IEP, it might be the special ed teacher. But in a lot of cases, particularly in the elementary schools, you probably are going to have better luck contacting at least the first time the school counselor in the elementary school. And if you just ask to speak to the school counselor, they'll hook you up with them. And if they don't have permission to talk to you at that point, the school counselor will know how to get that permission so that they can talk. Because we do want to partner with you desperately. I mean, I get the calls when people don't know what to do. And, one of my first suggestions is always, try to get permission and try to talk with the doctor, the counselor, whoever the child is seeing. The other thing is that all of our elementary schools have at least a half-time school nurse, and the school nurse is also really a good place to start. And they are we consider them as part of our student services team. So they team real closely with the school counselor and the school psychologist, and if there happens to be a social worker. But I would check with the parent and find out if there's a point person at the school that they've been working with. A lot of times.
So not the teacher.
Well, because the teacher's teaching. I mean.
Yeah, no, that's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, they're in the classroom. They're with kids almost all the time that the kids are in school. And truth be told, if they're not with the kids, odds are they're in collaborative planning or they're in meetings or whatever. Their time, they do have a lunch break, but it's really short. And often that's when they are they're making copies or they're getting organized for the rest of the day or whatever it is. So I think having somebody to kind of help you connect with the teacher is helpful. That's just what I think. I don't know, Pam, what do you think?
I absolutely agree with what Lucia said. The point person, I think, is very helpful, especially if we are dealing with a very complex student where a number of people, within the school building are involved with the student. The point person is a very good suggestion. And agree, we absolutely do want to connect and collaborate with all of you, as much as possible, because, your comment is right on, in that we do have some very complex students that we work with. So of course, as much information as we can gather from one another in trying to build, the most appropriate, type of instructional program for a student is really what we need to do. We started this conversation about, the challenging behaviors and some of the behavioral implications that you're seeing with some of the patients that are coming in, and we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing this increase in the number of students that are exhibiting challenging behavior and really struggling to provide the support to the school team. So again, as much conversations that we can have with you folks, as well as other resources within the county, with particular expertise in this area, would be very helpful.
Do you feel you're one of the school psychologists? Or
No, I'm not a school psychologist. I'm coordinator for specialized instruction and special education.
Do you feel that all of the schools in the county have enough guidance counselors or school psychologists, whatever, to deal with? This is a loaded question, okay? Because we often will say, like, when there's a lot of misbehavior in the house and at home, and the family, the families aren't going to take them to a therapist. They're just not. That's the household that's in trouble.
Yes.
That the kid would be
Right.
well served at the school level, but I know that you're very short on that type of help.
Yeah, we are not positioned at all, nor should we really be positioned to provide long-term therapy or whatever it is as school counselors, school psychologists, school social workers. That really isn't our role. Our role really is focused on the educational program of the child and to help the family access resources for outside providers, which is why we would love to be able to be talking to you to help us get there. We do have, we're very lucky in that we have a partnership with several practices. We call Extended School-Based Mental Health. Kathy Lane, who's I always forget your title, but anyhow, she's with our alternative education program, kind of takes the lead on that. So we have practices that are assigned to each of our feeder system, and they have providers, mental health providers, who will go into the schools and provide therapy for students in the school.
Do they have to be financially needy in order to
It
get
depends on the practice. It depends on the practice. Some accept insurance, some, accept medical assistance, that kind of thing.
We call them our wraparound services,
Right.
and we make different referrals according to the different needs of the students and
Yeah.
also the different social and economic levels of the family.
So if you had a question about whether that was available at a child's school, either the school, at the elementary level, it's the school counselor really, because in most of our elementary schools, there's a full-time, thankfully, there is a full-time school counselor in every one of our elementary schools now, thankfully.
And that's a great point of contact for a family
Right,
in crisis over a student, and also for our medical professions.
right.
That's good to know, because I think we need places like outreach places.
Right.
Like, we'll make their suggestion, but as you well know, our mental health services
Right.
are not well paid or not
Right.
paid,
Right.
and people are struggling to pay their bills, are not going to go. So that's nice to have that backup.
Right.
So in other words, if I have a family that's definitely in crisis,
Yeah.
I can call the school counselor and
Right.
say, can you get them set up with some, what would you call it?
Well, it's the extended school-based
Extended
mental
school-
health services,
Okay.
but they can also help them access other social services. If the whole family needs support, it might be, a referral to one of our.
And oftentimes they'll
Community
call
partnerships,
central
right.
office and
Uh-huh.
link to one of these professionals here.
So I'm Amy Lashir. I'm one of a couple of behavior specialists that work with kindergarten through 12th grade age students. And one of our biggest struggles, it's been kind of a rising trend, is parents not accepting, being ready to hear that there are learning differences, be it emotional, truly a cognitive issue, and really being ready to kind of accept the help and moving forward. And those are the learners that we struggle with, I think, more often than our kids that are actually identified to receive special ed services. They exist in large class sizes, 20 or more kids that have all of those thoughts in their head that they can't manage and don't have the regulation skills to cope with it, and then still aren't really getting the support that they really need. So that is a continuing, ongoing, and growing issue that we have right now in our public continuum.
On the other, I'm actually been really, see that how fortunate we are to have to be mandated, the Public Law 99-457, mandated to find kids who are delayed developmentally before they reach you, and so I think that there's it really has shifted, and since I've been a pediatrician, really the emphasis in our offices really has shifted more towards finding out how the family's doing, learning more about how the kid's developing, and making a quick, making a recommendation very quickly, as opposed to sort of the old, this family, you don't want to give them bad news, so the kid has no words at 2 years of age. You go, he'll outgrow that. So instead of doing that, we're more, we're compelled to make a referral with those kids, and then often there is, it opens up the conversation so that there's, that this kid is frustrated and has temper tantrums because they can't communicate. So at 2 years of age, you can start to look at essentially a learning difference, and that opens up the conversation so that if that kid is still delayed later on, you can, it's not a new topic.
Right. Well, with that, I'm watching the time. I want to close this session. I know some of our medical professionals are staying for the next session, but I want to thank you, really want to thank you. This is the beginning of something that I know will grow over time, and it's much needed. We need to be closer partners in this, and I think what we've talked about a lot today hasn't just been the learner, it's been the family. And so, and we're on one side of that, you're on the other side of that, but really it's all about the family and their growing children. So thank you for your insights today. I think it's a big move for us into the right direction. I know that we're going to break here, and that some of our medical professionals are leaving and some are staying. But if you have any questions, certainly you can come on up and ask while we're changing gears. Thank you so much for coming today. Appreciate it.
What? What?
said it was doing. They get working out their ears. Yep. No, I just think the other ones have never spoken because their older sister has totally overpowered the conversation. And I wonder whether in the house it's the same thing. But when she looked at me, I melted. Yes, absolutely. I went over to her, I squatted down, and I said, "You have just totally made my day happy." And so then, of course, I'm Mr. Richard. I'm Mr. Richard. I'm Mr. Richard. She got the positive reinforcement. That is something for you? Yeah, my baby. You going back to my All right, go Hobble. Yes, Hobble was one. Baby. I'm trying to figure out the ways to Maureen now. We're starting approaching Mike, and then Lucia got up, and then we had this guy, and that woman clearly had a question and never got to ask any question. Asked a very long question that had a very long answer. We need to build in more question time for the public. We do. If there are only, even if there are only 3 or 5 members of the public, we need more public. We do. Yeah. Because thank God I caught her. I was typing Anne Arundel County Public Schools, and really all the public schools. Of course, you're promoting pubic schools again? Okay. No hair off my pretty boy today.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here today. I'm Maureen McMahon, the Deputy Superintendent of Academics and Strategic Initiatives. Thank you so much for coming. This is a new endeavor that we have begun, this new journey in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. As you know, our big initiative under the direction of our superintendent, Dr. George Arlotto, is early childhood learning. And what we know is learning happens best when kids are happy and healthy, right? So with our partners, the medical professionals that you see here today, we really want to get a feel for what they're seeing out there. What are the health issues of our youngest learners? What are the health issues of our youngest learners' parents and their families? And are they seeing new trends? Are they, do they have some new insights that would help us do our job better? Because ultimately, we're gearing our learning around the whole child, right? Not just the child who comes to us for 6.5 hours each day. It's not just about their learning time. It's really about them as individuals. So without further ado, I want to introduce Ms. Tina Gilmeister, who will then introduce the panel.
Thanks, Dr. Hernandez. I'm Tina Gilmeister, and I'm the staff coordinator here at Anne Arundel County Public Schools. And my doctoral research actually was focused on early learning and how our youngest learners think in a systematic way and how they have these ideas that are present with them. Even as they come to us in the school system, there's so much that they bring with them before they enter their school years. So we are so lucky to have here with us today our panel of experts.
And I'm just going to ask you to take a few seconds to introduce yourselves, a little bit about your background to our audience.
Hi, I'm Diego Escobosa, and I'm actually we didn't bring up this last time, but I'm bilingual in Spanish, and one of the issues that hopefully will come up in this this meeting. And I'm a pediatrician here on Riva Road.
Hi, Jim Rice. I'm a pediatrician with Annapolis Pediatrics, both in Annapolis and office in Crofton and Kent Island as well. I've been practicing for 18 years. I have 5 kids of my own, so get to learn at home a little bit too.
I'm Dr. Donald Schneider. I'm a pediatrician in Gambrills, Maryland. Been practicing in the area for 34 years.
Thank you so much. So we have several things that our communities and our teachers and our parents have brought to our attention that we want to talk to the panel about today and get some of your expert opinions on, and maybe some advice for how that can help us as parents and educators as we move forward with our early learning initiatives. We've been seeing in our school systems a lot of higher frequency of some learning challenges and some social emotional issues that children are coming to school with. And what do you think might be causing the increase that we're seeing, and what do you think are some of the best strategies to work with students that are experiencing those challenges?
Well, I'll start. I think the frequency is increasing largely because of we recognize the disorders a lot more and dealing with a lot of things that are more chronic. And we have all grown to be experts on dealing with things like ADHD and anxiety and other mood issues. And that's become a significant portion of our practice since we've now immunized all the really cool stuff out of our practices, which has been great. But on a day-to-day basis, the greatest challenges I think we are exposed to are the challenges of stresses at home that don't come with a diagnosis, from parental discord, parental divorce, separation, remarriage, new babies in the household, merged families, and then the other thing we see, I think, a lot of is increased issues around sleep and poor sleep and its effect on daytime behaviors. And I think that's probably the most significant thing I've seen over the years is an increased number of kids with sleep disorders having an impact on their day-to-day behavior, but especially on their learning.
I certainly agree with Don's points. I think when we look at the incidence of a lot of these disorders, I think some of the numbers are alarming. Autism 1 in 60, ADHD 11%, and all of these numbers are rising. And are we really, is more pathology present, or are we recognizing it more? And I think probably both are true. We certainly are doing a better job recognizing some of the disorders. We've most of us have initiated screening programs now, and we used to, pediatricians, I think, have always felt like we can pick things up in the exam room pretty well, and we trust our instincts, and that serves us well in most cases. But with more systematic study, we've learned that really, unless we do a screening program and really ask these questions of every patient, we're going to miss kids who are presenting with developmental and behavioral problems. And so we now do screening starting at 9 months of age, standardized screens, and we do that periodically throughout the young childhood years. And all of us were skeptical at first that we really wouldn't pick up anything more than we did by our instincts, but we do. And so that, I think, has helped in us identifying these kids earlier and identifying more of these kids, and I think fewer are slipping through the cracks.
I think it has been really, over the last 20 years I've been practicing, one thing that really has changed in the early childhood years is that we as pediatricians actually have, when we discover someone who has emotional or developmental delays, we actually have programs like Child Find in this county to refer them to, because for so long we had this information, this feeling this person was delayed developmentally, but we didn't have very many options. So I think that really has changed. It's one of those ideas like if you build it, they will come. So I think that we find more kids with developmental delays because we have more we can offer them, and I think that's really changed. I think Don's initial presentation, he did such a great job the first time around. I was hoping he'd do that summary again. He was very complete description. One thing I agree with everything he said. We do have a generation of parents, I think, that often don't have their own parents around, so that they tend to they don't have advisors at home. So I think that in the last few years, I think I've become more of the like an adult advisor to young parents about normal behavior and how much can you actually do for another human being, in terms of letting go and allowing kids to take responsibility for things that only they can have, like how they fall asleep, how long they sleep, and what they eat and how much. Parents often have a hard time letting go of these things, and it causes all sorts of problems.
I think it's really interesting, the issues around family structure and sleep that you're bringing up. And can you tell us about some of the things that you've seen in your practices related to those, and then about some of the strategies that we might put in place as families or as school systems to help with those challenges?
I can start with that. I think I think early on, as we see infants every 2 to 3 months through the first year and a half of life, and I think at every visit we try to focus on growth, nutrition, sleep, development, and that those discussions start early on. And I think one of the things I notice is some difficulty with limit setting, and certainly sometimes it's just a simple comment of, it's okay if your 9-month-old cries. That's that's a part of parenting, and I think that sometimes parents just need to be told from someone else it's okay to set those limits, to take charge, and maybe it is fewer grandparents around, fewer extended families that help families say that. But I find as a pediatrician, often there's a little bit of just some coaching as far as take charge, set the limits. And I think where we see those limits not set, and it carries on to this 4 to 7-year-old age group, some of these kids have infantile sleep habits that have never been kind of shaped by the parent.
I agree. I think that sleep is a primary player in kids' function in school. I think a lot of our patients, younger patients, sleep poorly, have medical reasons for sleeping poorly, but also have issues with falling asleep and staying asleep thereafter related to the behavioral patterns that have developed earlier in childhood. So I think that's a critical thing we work with a lot. If we ask what the school system could do, probably not pertinent to the group we're talking about today, 2 to 7 year olds, but our older kids would do much better if they had a later start time. That's the stance of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I think that's a critical issue for those kids. How to make that happen, I don't know, but I know it's a hot topic everywhere.
Great, thank you so much. We also are seeing an increasingly changing world. So a different world in terms of what our children are exposed to at what ages with technology and with their environment. And how do you think that impacts their development in this critical early learning phase?
Yeah, I work with parents a lot about around the use of screens. I myself, I'm a builder. I like building things, and I don't. Just generally, I think that I talk to parents about there's a balance between consumption and creating. So I think that kids naturally are, love to create, and sometimes we, maybe we're busy, or we ourselves have bought into, ourselves use screens way too much, and that gets kind of dampened down in kids that need to create. And I to sum it up, I tell parents, I'd rather they spend time looking at a tree than a video of a tree. There's a lot more, you use a lot more of your senses, and but I think that's another, given that there is sometimes that goes against the societal grain. Sometimes we can coach parents to work, to be patient and play with kids with in tactile games like building things with Lincoln Logs or whatever, as opposed to passively consuming something on a screen. I've been using this this little mantra that they use in Northern Virginia and some other counties as well, called 95210, which is kind of sums up in that age group that we're talking about, the 4 to 7 year old age group. So we all of us, even adults, need 9 hours of sleep at night, 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, 2 hours maximum of screen time, an hour of exercise a day at least, and 0 added sugar. So that just kind of gets a conversation around that. And do I eat 0 added sugar? I did not eat any of the cookie today, but sometimes I do. But the idea isn't that we're saying this is an ideal, and it helps parents kind of if you can start talking to them at 2 about this as opposed to 10 when they're already have these habits in place. It's much easier.
I had a cookie, but only one. Technology is here to stay, and we can't pretend it's not there. Like I said, I have 5 kids at home, and it's certainly a struggle in our home trying to regulate it. And I think every rule that is created around limiting access to no phones in rooms, no iPads on the second floor of the house, every rule gets broken at some point. And I find as schools are integrating technology more, sometimes it poses challenges in the home. I've talked to parents about that very rule, that at 9 p.m. the electronics go into a charging shelf in the kitchen and they stay there. And I said, well, wait a minute, my son has to do his project on his iPad. And I get that from my own kids at home. So I think that, clearly technology is here to stay. I think in this young age group, if we can help those kids learn how to use technology, but also how to put technology down and go outside, we're going to serve those kids well as they grow and develop.
And I agree with all those things. I think technology is an incredible advance. I think it plays 2 roles that I'd mention. One is in the hour before sleep, using screens that are lit up. There's lots of biologic evidence that affects sleep. Without that, it is incredibly stimulating and makes falling asleep and staying asleep difficult. And kids who use lit up screens before they go to bed have a worse night's sleep, and that's been shown. And the second issue is we see lots of parents whose faces are on their phones and not on in our offices, looking at their emails and texts and other things, and that distracts them from the care and raising of their own children. I think that parents need to recognize that while the phone is an incredible source for socialization for the generation of parents who are taking care of kids right now, we think that there's a time when it has to be put down and they need to spend more time interacting with the children.
Yeah, so it's the modeling aspect of that too, that, not only that the parent's not tuned into what's going on in the visit, but the child's watching this all, and they'll behave the same way. So I think some of it falls on us to model healthy use of technology.
I just discovered there's technology that monitors what employees are doing, and you can. I think one of them is called Active Track, and what I've been working with some of my families to use this technology, because what we used to be able to do is, there was a TV like in a central area of the house, and we all knew what everyone was watching. We can have that back. It's just that we can't. If we make it seem like we're like spying on our kids, and it won't work. But if you out in the open say, I have this program, and it's going to just help us all have a open conversation about how we use, what websites we go on, et cetera. And they have groupings. It gives you like a pie chart, and essentially there's big red portion is the non-useful sites according to a work environment, and the blue ones are productive sites. So, just one way to think about using technology to help us manage technology.
Thanks. That's a great resource. So we've talked a lot about some of the challenges that families and children are experiencing. And what do you see as the dynamic between pediatrician, healthcare, and family in helping to meet all of these challenges that the children are facing?
Obviously the partnership word is a big one. And, I think we have a savvy group of parents and patients, and we know that sort of the old do this because it's good for you sort of advice doesn't really hold water. So I think that parents are coming in looking for evidence and looking for a discussion about things. I do sometimes get asked, well, how do you handle it with your own kids? And while that's somewhat anecdotal evidence, there's a little bit of a put your money where your mouth is. How do you do it at home? So I do think that partnership is helpful. I think also this is great, getting a connection with the schools. And I know sometimes we just communicate on Vanderbilt scales and comments written there, and those are really helpful. But to forge more of a bond like this, I think is great. And I think as medicine's changing and we're faced with new ways of delivering care, new ways of getting paid by insurance companies even, there's more of an emphasis, I think, in a positive way on more community involvement. That we can't just think inside the four walls of our office and end there. That I think we need to reach out and have more of this kind of dialogue. I think that makes a big difference.
One of the things I love about pediatrics, and when I'm really excited when one of my patients tells me that they want to go become a doctor, or especially they want to become a pediatrician, and I really invite them back, and I get parents' permission, but I have them come and shadow me some mornings in the summertime sometimes. But I don't know that I could. I'm just so lucky. I think we all feel that way. That we're really just lucky to be in a position where we feel like we make such a big difference in people's lives, because we can get. It's one of those few, kind of setups in which. There are two adults who are immediately may not even know this adult, but immediately we have this purpose in common, and that's to make this third person's life better. And where do you get that? Teachers get that, of course, but we get to, the parents are right there, and so it's a really wonderfully fulfilling job. And I think one of the really cool things is that we get to. Whether we have someone who is, just arrived from El Salvador or Honduras, or someone who teaches at the Naval Academy, as a parent, there's all this commonality in the way we just want this kid to do well, and we want them to have a good life, and I tend to be a lumper in life. So I can see the kind of the commonality, in that, and so I think that one of the advantages we have is that we do see these families over and over again. They do make a connection to us. They ask us about our kids. Our kids' pictures are all over the wall. They often remember my kids' names, and I have to tell you, if I saw them, don't say this to anyone, but if I saw them in the mall, I often don't remember where I know them from, but they remember my kids' names. I mean, there's, you just have this wonderful connection. So now that we're kind of, as you were mentioning, Jim, that we're sort of stepping outside of our walls, and we're able to really advocate for these kids in all these different settings, for our patients in all these different settings. That's the more we do that, the better, because we do have these families' trust, and we are very committed to them. So, did that make sense?
We as pediatricians are tasked through our academy with something called the Bright Futures guidelines, and if we were to take a 6-year-old physical and cover all the Bright Future guidelines for that age, that would be our only patient of the day. They're long. So as the kids get older, we spend much more time focusing on one particular topic, and then we need to find out from the parents where their challenges are and then address that topic. And more so, they've become topics related to peer interactions, sports, school performance, and then the other stressors of life. And many of those kids, we sort of only briefly will cover the issues of nutrition, safety, sleep, and the other things that we are charged with. But that has led us more and more to have interactions with the community in general, because that's where those problems are occurring, and we help them to deal with that to a great extent.
I've heard you mention a lot about some of these different stressors kids are experiencing. So what can we be on the lookout for as parents and educators as manifestations of the stressors that they might be experiencing in their life?
So I'll put them in two categories. There's the medical stressors. A great time of year to talk about allergies, because kids are congested and affected by that to a great extent, and you might see them sleepy in school and attending poorly because of it. And then the other major stressor, as I've mentioned a few times already, is sleep, and those kids will also look fairly inattentive in school. They'll be sleepy in school. They'll perform very poorly. And then at home, there are stressors that occur related to just family dynamics, new baby in the household, grandma's sick, and then a million other things that occur. And that'll present in school as it changes in behavior, because those are acute issues. They're something that's changed recently. So they'll be much more inattentive. They might be more hyperactive or impulsive. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen kids who have stressors who referred back because they're concerned that the child might be exhibiting symptoms of ADHD, when it really is related to the stress or the emotional stress that's going on.
As far as manifestations of stress, I mean, we've all had kids over the years who have abdominal pain, and we can't figure out the cause. And so we certainly go down the tree of the physical causes first, but some of those kids, it's pure stress that is responsible for it. Hard to get to the bottom of that from our end, but certainly stress can be manifest with physical symptoms, and that's obviously a challenge for all of us. I also, in this younger age group, this 4 to 7 age group, we definitely see a lot of kids present with symptoms of anxiety. I mean, kids have fears at this age, and certainly the normal fears about thunderstorms and scary dogs and scary dreams, and those things are totally age appropriate and normal. I think the manifestation I look at, I know Don's talked about sleep a lot, but when those fears are negatively impacting sleep, we think that might be pushed more into possibly an anxiety disorder. So if it affects sleep, it affects eating, or function. So school attendance or family function. Are you guys having trouble getting out of the house to do what you need to do because of these anxieties and fears? That's where we get the mental health professionals involved and look more into the possibility of a disorder.
I think Dr. Turner mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think that the idea that with some of our kids, not at that age group so much, but the older kids tend to be overscheduled, and there's just so much that they're doing, and there's actually an increase also in something called functional constipation, which either we're getting better at diagnosing it, or but it's basically it's related to, I think at least one of the gastroenterologist that I spoke to relates it to this, is this idea that people are so busy now that they don't even have time to poop. And so so they wind up with a large mass that's in their abdomen just all the time. Basically because the signal from their gut to their brain has not. The gut is full, but the brain is missing that somehow because it's used to being full. So there's a number of issues related to how overscheduled our patients are. Some of that has to do with the fact that both parents have to work as well. I mean, they're, one of my interests is attention deficit disorder, and so it's a struggle because you want to parents are not seeing these kids for 12 hours out of the day sometimes. Like they go to aftercare and after school. And so, so if you ask them how they're doing on their meds, the parents may not know unless they're taking it on the weekends, which I recommend. But so that often is an issue that the parents aren't even seeing the kid throughout most of during their day because they're so busy.
And talking about all these activities, we see younger and younger children being involved in competitive sports or competitive dance or these high-level activities. Are you seeing any injuries or long-term effects associated with children being in these competitive, highly skilled activities at younger and younger ages?
I mean, sure, we do see, overuse injuries, probably in a slightly older age group, a little bit more commonly. But I think the biggest issue is sort of burnout, and it's really well described that kids who are forced into early specialization in activities, whether it's sports or dance or what have you, burn out early. They're not allowed to sort of explore this idea of free play. There's not enough time for that, clearly. But I think that psychologically, at least, burnout is prevalent in young kids who are forced into specialization, and I think unfortunately some of this is driven by adults who seem to be making an industry out of kids sports, and it has some unfortunate ripple effects.
If I had to pick two injuries that I would concentrate on in kids who play sports aggressively, and a lot is first girls and their knees, and if they were taught how to run and stretch and exercise appropriately, we would prevent a lifelong debilitation from their future ACL injury. A girl who undergoes ACL injury with repair or without repair is probably destined to a life of osteoarthritis of the knees when they're older. They just don't know it when they're teenagers. And the other thing we see with increasing, maybe not frequency, but we're recognizing it better more and more, that I think has a very significant impact on their school performance is concussions. A majority of the concussions we see are not from sports, but occur from walking into walls and falling off chairs and stuff like that pretty much. But we're seeing more and more concussions in sports. We're fortunate now that at least the professionals who are coaching kids are a little more cognizant of the need to sort of protect those kids from re-injury by restricting their return to sport both on the same day and the time thereafter. But we see kids with concussions who suffer in their school performance, not even returning to sports, suffer in their school performance for days, weeks, months, and maybe if they're having recurrent concussions, sometimes for years.
I think you bring up some really great points for us as educators to continue to look at the whole child, as Dr. McMahon said. So when they're experiencing some of these issues in our classroom, some of these manifestations, we consider things that are happening physically, medically, and in the home as stressors that bring these issues to light and manifesting in our classrooms. From your perspective, just changing gears a little bit, we're also in our schools seeing this increase in these allergies, not only the seasonal allergies, but the food allergies and the special diets that patients are needing in our classes, in our schools, the peanut-free, nut-free lunch areas. Are you seeing that same increase, and what do you attribute that to? And is there anything else that we can be doing as a school system to support these children?
Food allergies have definitely increased, at least a 20% increase over the last 15 years, maybe higher by some estimates. But there's a number of theories as to why. One favored theory is the hygiene hypothesis, that we're too clean, that a couple generations ago we, lived with farm animals around and had more exposure to infectious disease. And as there's less exposure to other pathogens out in the world that our immune system shunts down a different pathway, which is the allergic pathway. And that theory's had some evidence and some support. There's other theories about differences in gut bacteria, et cetera. But there's clearly been an increase. I think it's important to distinguish, allergy that can lead to anaphylaxis, which is a life-threatening situation, from a food intolerance, which can be serious, although not life-threatening. So important to understand those kids who really have anaphylaxis, and anaphylaxis to peanut in particular can be fatal. And the incidence is, the risk is higher in a child who also has asthma. So when you combine the history of asthma with food allergy, it can really signal a child who's at risk for a fatal serious reaction. So we do need to take it seriously. I think peanut-free zones are important, and sometimes the only way to protect young kids. So a real increase, and certainly the anaphylaxis is a very serious issue.
Peanut allergy in particular, we're on the dawn of, I think, a new era in figuring out what the cause of it is. We think there's been genetic changes in peanuts that have caused a lot of the allergies, and they're now peanuts being produced that are allergy-free. And then we now are closer to desensitizing kids with peanut allergies by oral desensitization, which at one time we thought was nutty to do oral desensitization, but now it's almost the standard for desensitizing kids against these things. So we're going to come up with better ideas and better cures for these things. But right now, not to scare people, peanut allergies almost never cause a problem. Anaphylaxis is extremely rare, but when it happens, it's bad news, and that's why we need to be very cautious.
I mentioned this before with the last group, but there's just as a side note, there's the kind of the standard medication for anaphylaxis is, we have our patients carry an epinephrine pen, and there's now the Auvi-Q, which is nice for when grandma has the kids, as a child is taking care of them, because they this is technology being what it is, it actually talks to you and it tells you just what to do. And one of the points that was brought up earlier as well is that you can't go wrong by just jabbing the kid with if there's a doubt, just inject the patient, because there's essentially it's you make adrenaline yourself, and you're not going to the kid's going to be fine. But if you miss anaphylaxis, it could be really awful. So, and I mentioned too that one of my partners actually just by accident injected himself. He thought he was demonstrating the trainer to someone, and to one of our moms, and he just jabbed himself with the actual epinephrine pen, and he's fine now. Just a little twitch in his right eye, but other than that, I think he had that before. But it's completely benign to actually to give the shot if you have a doubt.
I'll give my anecdote. I have a good friend who's wasp allergic, and he was stung by a wasp and was having an anaphylactic reaction, and pulled out his EpiPen and injected it into his thumb. So I always tell parents, we've always told parents, is that when your EpiPen expires, give it to an orange, so you're good at it when it comes back, pretty much. Okay, maybe don't eat the orange, pretty much, but basically leave it to an orange. You at least have known how to give the shot one time.
That's great advice for everyone, not to be afraid to administer that life-saving treatment. Thank you very much for that. So along a little bit different vein, we're also seeing impact on food and nutrition, not only from allergies, but in terms of healthy food movement and healthy lunches. We've been, working very hard as a system to increase our healthy lunches and Eat the Rainbow initiative and those types of things, and that's been really great for our children. So what are you seeing in your practices related to childhood nutrition, and how does that have an impact long-term developmentally, the nutrition that they get when they're younger?
Well, the O word is the one that sticks with us the most. That obesity has been a huge issue. Dr. Turner, who at our last session, made the point that we're at least starting to make some inroads into changing it. That the generation now who are youngest are not quite as obese as the generation who are in school now and or in high school. If we look at the ways to deal with it, one of the commentaries I give our parents whose kids have issues with extra weight gain, whose BMIs are increasing, is to look at school lunch. And the good news is school lunch is changing to some extent, but if you look at any school lunch and compare it to a brought lunch, almost any brought lunch, it'll probably be 100 to 200 calories less than the school lunch will be if they eat the whole thing of both. And my simple math, if I do 100 or 200 calories a day, 200 calories a day times 200 school days, I use 200 because I can't multiply 180. It comes out to 40,000 calories a year, and that 40,000 calories at 3,000 calories a pound is a 13-pound change, one you didn't gain or otherwise. So we tend to tell people to try and pack school lunches, and more importantly, when you've packed it, it's easy to pack the right things, because when they open the lunch, that's their only choice. At home, it's much more difficult because there's all those pantries you can go to and snack on things. If you pack the right thing, that's what's going to be eating the most. So I tend to have people try and avoid school lunch if they can afford to.
On the positive side, we talk to kids about eating breakfast. That is critically important and gets missed an unbelievable amount of time. So that's certainly one positive thing we encourage people to do, and hopefully helps with their school day to some extent.
Of constipation, but yeah, that's. But there, yeah, typically, yeah, in our culture, mornings are so fraught. There's so much to do, and so and that's typically with the gastrocolic reflex. That's when generally people would go if they could. But so it cuts into working with families early on about making mornings a little less hectic and having. We try to create even in a 4-year-old, you can do this like with pictures. You can create like a morning list, where there's 3 things that you're to do in the morning, and they can be pictures, and essentially over time you don't have to police the list. You can police the list. I'm sorry, you don't have to police the individual items on the list, and one of those items could be have breakfast. So that and it's been shown that if you organize a child's morning, that the whole day, rest of the day goes better.
For parents and educators looking for resources on any number of topics, where would you recommend they start? Would you recommend they start with Wikipedia, or, a different area where there might be more expert resources?
So I'll put in a plug for the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's our professional organization. I'm pretty involved in our state level AAP, and I know they've tried to partner with the State Department of Education, at least on some initiatives, including Reach Out and Read and others. But I refer parents to the AAP all the time. There's a very good website, has some good information just on the basic homepage and navigating there. They also have a bookstore, and they're really pretty vetted resources. It's so risky to just Google something and find the first book that comes up written by who knows who, but the title sounds good. So I think it's important, and I encourage parents to know, what's the source? Who's telling you this? And I think that I feel comfortable when the American Academy of Pediatrics stamp is on it.
And it's even some MDs that have gone to the dark side. I think there's one in particular that does holding off on vaccinations, whose father was famous, and he glommed onto the family name and wrote a number of books with suggestions that we as pediatricians who are not immunologists are not really qualified to make. So when parents ask me about things like that, like an MD wrote a book and they make these recommendations, I often say, that's, but we follow what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends.
And again, educationally, the Academy has a website called healthychildren.org, which is a good resource for almost all diseases. Though I will say that when I'm stumped in life or in the office, the first place I do turn is Wikipedia. Yeah. And then I look someplace else, because it's so quick.
Thank you so much. I just want to turn now to creating a healthy environment. So, what can we do in our homes and in our classrooms to create a healthy environment that will support our youngest learners? What would be your recommendations for that?
Well, I guess we talk about toxins. The world is filled with them. BPA, bisphenols A, and phthalates, which were in infant products as both a softening agent and a hardening agent, have been in our society for the longest time, and they've been removed from a lot of things, so you can always see things that are now BPA free, but there are still lots of other things, the plasticware you use in your house and such, and we think it has a significant impact on a variety of endocrinologic issues and probably other issues as well. So that's a toxin that is ubiquitous, and there must be hundreds of others that are just like it. So it's always hard to sort out exactly which ones you should worry about. But I would think that I would throw plastics on the top of my list there. And the other one we probably is ubiquitous and hard to get around is cat dander. So cat dander lives in people's houses and it's brought to the schools. So there's probably just as much cat dander in most classrooms as there is in many people's homes because it comes on children's clothing and picks our cat allergic kids and makes them more allergic. How do we control those things? It's hard to say. Obviously, the first is going to be with governmental regulation in a greater degree, and the second is let's get rid of those cats.
I love cats. I think encouraging families to to dovetail on that. I think this is the best time in the history of the planet to raise a child. In so many ways. I mean, it could, to be really blunt, there's a TED talk on this by a very smart guy, which name I can't remember, but he says basically this is the time in history when you're least likely to be murdered. Isn't that great? And so we have just an abundance of stuff. And one of the things that I struggle with in my practice, I have lots of patients who have come from Central America, and what happens is, there is such an abundance of stuff. And for them, I think it's happened to all of us, but I think it's just more dramatic in that there was a time when, just recently when these families were maybe struggling to have nutritious foods. And now in a way we're over-nutrited. We have way too much nutrition. It's probably the wrong kinds and the wrong combination, the wrong balance. But I think if we can work on that, come from the point of view of not like, geez, we're on the verge of disaster, or food is a poison. If we can think of it more like, isn't this wonderful? What a blessing we have, and this is the way we can manage it. Let's in the same way I think of let's consume. Really, let's create more than we consume. Let's grow our own tomatoes. What's the big deal? And also just let's not consume more than we need. And I think that can be just a philosophy for life generally. But we have an abundance of things, technology, food, etc. And we just need to. It happens so quickly that we don't know how to manage it well.
Yeah, I guess you talk about balance, which I think is key. And I think with screen time, it's not just limiting screen time, but balance it with some time outside. Get outdoors, I think, is one of the key environmental things we can do for young kids. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities when they get outside. The other one I put it in a plug for, which I think could be lumped into environment, is trying to have a family dinner. And it's sort of been shown in multiple studies that family dinner, especially when you look at adolescents, is protective against risky behaviors. Pretty hard to do it. Like I said, I have 5 kids. We try to do it. Sometimes it's like later than we want to have it, but we do it, most nights. But I think it's a huge time to bring the family together. You just have that some modeling of behavior at the table, but also a lot of discussion that opens up. So I think it's one I advise families to try to do that at least a couple nights a week.
Great. So we want to take this time now to open up some questions for the audience. So if you have a question out there that maybe you've been coming to mind as you've been listening to our great discussion, if you want to just step to the microphone and then our panelists will be happy to address it.
So we talk about obesity a lot in children, but back in 20 years ago, it was all about bulimia and anorexia and those ailments. Are you seeing an increase or decrease in that? Because being honest, I think we have a family member, child is under a lot of stress to be good at sports, and we've seen a big pullback in eating habits. So I was wondering whether or not you're seeing those behaviors as much as we were focused on them 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, those disorders are still there and still prevalent, unfortunately. Those disorders probably have less to do with nutrition and more to do with psychological stress and I think looking for some control in one's life. But certainly, it's important to recognize those disorders. I mean, there would be very uncommon in the age group we're talking about,
Right.
but certainly in adolescence, they're there. And I would say, we are possibly seeing eating disorders in increasing incidence in males, which maybe had been under-recognized in the past, but is becoming more recognized or more prevalent as well. But yes, those are serious issues and certainly still prevalent.
Hi. As part of my job, I work to connect families and schools and families. And oftentimes, we, as school personnel, talk about what families aren't bringing to the table. But what I'd like to do is turn that around and ask you what you see as strengths, since you've been in practice for a number of years, what you see as strengths that families have now that maybe 20, 30 years ago they didn't, and especially to Dr. Escoboza, strengths immigrant families may have that might be different from the American-born families.
Great question. Thanks.
I do think my job has gotten a lot, like in some ways, easier over the years. And I don't know if that's because I'm just more familiar with my families and they're, seeing it like the second generation now. So where, they're taking care of the grandkids now. I think I was born in the Dominican Republic, so a lot of there's when the families do come in, there's all of us have stories that we use to sort of make sense of the world. So that's obvious, and ours and American ones are really different than the Salvadorian ones. They all the little babies often have that seed then on their wrists, and the families often don't know why it's there. It's just what we do. It's just what makes us Salvadorian. I think there are a lot of students. One of the things that they've managed to kind of navigate the system, decide to go to another country, and I didn't do this. My father did. I was the recipient of this gift, but these are really sophisticated families, and they can get through some pretty severe obstacles in order to move, thousands of miles away. One of the things that gets missed a lot in our families, and it's no one looks at this systematically, but there are a number of our families that are also illiterate, and because it's very stigmatizing to say so, to admit to that, it's we often miss it. So that sometimes we've talked about this in our practice, is trying to design educational materials around in CD format or DVD format. Now, you're speaking to the strengths, we can actually give them a website that they can go to because they know Facebook. They know how to get to Facebook. A lot of our adults know how to do that. So, there's strengths. I think that there are, as I say, I think that there's an abundance of things, especially as someone who's familiar with another country, that we just have great amount of food and opportunities, and I think that generally where I see the problems are generally kind of managing that abundance, even in our Latino families, where there is a large proportion of the first generation that's very obese and very picky, and I wonder, wait a minute, you had 5 things to eat. I've been there. You had 5 things to eat in El Salvador. How come this kid will only eat 2 things here, and they're both fried? So there is like a probably habits that are, that occur early on that if you have a conversation early on about, now that we know kind of could all have that concern about obesity, if you talk about those habits early on, I think you can prevent that problem.
And I agree, as Dr. Escoboza talked about the technology. We badmouth technology a lot earlier today about how it affects kids and parents and otherwise, but technology brings those parents into our offices educated, and that starts at a different level of conversation. We have to be very well prepared, but more importantly, it lets us go deeper and deeper into the conversation rather than starting from the beginning. So I think technology is a great advance and a big change over the generation before of parents who didn't have as much access to information.
That I think families generally feel empowered to ask for help. I find maybe from when I started 18 years ago, a little less hesitancy in maybe this generation of parents to come in and say, hey, here's what's going on. I need some help with this, which I think is a great strength.
Hi, I'm Alba Morales. I'm bilingual facilitator for the school system. My 16 colleagues and I, we work with Hispanic families, Korean families, Vietnamese, Arabic, and the list go on. So basically, we are working with a group of international families. I have two questions. The first one is very quick. Do you have interpreters in your offices? I know, Dr. Escoboza, you're bilingual in the Spanish language, but I don't know. I have here write your name a lot, Dr. Rice, when I'm doing enrollments. Do you have interpreters or language service access in your offices?
Yo también hablo español.
Oh, muy bien.
Sí, lo habla muy bien, ¿verdad que sí?
Yeah,
El doctor Arroz, yo le digo el doctor Arroz.
Okay, that's a quick question just to keep it in mind that international families, they have been growing and growing in Anne Arundel County.
No, you're right. It's a challenge. I mean, I'm lucky enough to speak Spanish, but we realized our front desk needs that same skill, so we do try to have at least a Spanish-speaking bilingual staff member present. Now, there are, of course, more languages than Spanish and English, and so maintaining an office staff that's ready to go with any language is very difficult. There are some tech now. I mean, we're obligated with patients to be able to communicate and to have translation services. The hospital has a phone service that's available that we've used in some instances with less common languages that we can access even after hours. So that's always an option for us as well.
Excellent. And my second question, that is not so quick, so fast, is about international families and mental health. Because the dynamic of the families are not as the traditional model. We have reunifying families. We have families that they just get together here. So the dynamics of the families have to change. And also this impact every single member of the family. And we see every day more and more kids with mental health issues. So we would like to know, have you seen this in your office? How you handle this, and how can we partnership?
And unfortunately, one of our major resources for this, the Christian Counseling Center, and they treat Muslims too, I asked them. They're just, it's their name. But the Christian Counseling Center has been in Annapolis for 30 years, I believe, and they just closed down, and they accepted Medicaid, and they had a Spanish-speaking therapist, and they seem really responsive to the need of the community, but they're not there anymore. They were right on Old Solomon Road. So it's very, very challenging when we have patients who, because we have a limited amount of time to discuss some of these issues, and then we then count on these folks to be able to sort of navigate the mental health system, and it's a very tough thing, daunting for kind of a native, someone who's from here. So it's a very, very difficult thing, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring folks from the community in mental health services, like counselors. We try to have them come by on Wednesdays to kind of introduce themselves and what do they do, what do they offer, so that it's on the tip of our minds, like when we see a family, who we can send them to and have that connection with them. It's an odd place because therapists aren't, they don't write us notes. So it's really, I don't think I've worked anywhere else where that's been the case. But in Maryland, maybe it's not mandated or not. But we don't really know. Like I'm often the last to know. I'm looking, seeing a patient, and they say, "Oh, his therapist says such and such." I'm like, "You're seeing a therapist?" So that there are not notes. If they see a gastroenterologist or whatever, we get notes in the chart that tells us, they've been seen recently. We get to review them before the visit, hopefully, and then we can address some of those issues. But there isn't a good communication system between the medical providers and the mental health providers.
Hi there. I'm John Polinsky from Seeds for Success. I'm actually accompanied by Ann Thomas from Seeds for Success. We run after-school programs, tutoring and mentoring programs for kids in public housing. So we have at least 2 questions for you, but we'll try to be quick. Going back to thinking about immigrant families, but almost all of our kids, the kids we serve, are on either Medicaid or or New Americans. So serving kids who are undocumented has been a real challenge for us, especially when they need more than just a checkup. So I'd love to hear any advice on that, and then we may have another question at least.
What we do is we're going to see anyone who comes in. I think everyone's the same way. Like if you're sick, we're going to see you, then we'll deal with how you're going to pay later, basically. I think a lot of times we're lucky that we have several bilingual people in all areas of the office. So and we have another bilingual doctor. Actually, she speaks 4 languages, so I think that what we found is that they often just need help navigating the system, and then we can get them on Medicaid or I guess now I don't know if REACH program is still not the REACH program. Anyway, but we try to navigate. Some of our staff can actually help them kind of make the phone calls while they're there in order to sort of apply to some of these programs. But it's hard because if the child was born here, you can obviously easily put them on Medicaid. But if they're not, it's more challenging. Yeah.
I mean, it's a big challenge. I had a child last year, undocumented, who had serious medical complex issues, and I was seeing her in the office and just not worrying about the bills, but when we needed specialists, we needed children's, we needed Hopkins, and we had to move mountains to get coverage for her. It was very difficult, so it's a problem. I'm with you. We should talk at some point after this about solutions, well, I think there are a lot of pediatricians around who want to help, want to do more, and just finding opportunities to do that where we can still make a living and carry on our practices, but do something to help. I think would be an opportunity people would be interested in.
Right. That was our experience. Is we had to go all the way to Children's to get certain specialized care.
Right.
And it's multiple trips too.
Oh yeah, it's a challenge.
Love it if we could make that easier for kids and families.
Right.
And our second question is, I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner, and we've been putting in supports in place. You mentioned Bright Futures, and the fact that, in clinics and in offices, it can take a lot of time. So I've been working with Seeds for Success in our tutoring mentoring program to put some primary and secondary prevention stuff in place. And I'm wondering if you know of other healthcare providers who are involved in the same avenue, and if so, if we could all work together to establish some best practices. Mainly what we're doing is we're putting in supports that will support the child in terms of primary health as well as school health. So I'm not doing direct care. So I'd love to find other healthcare providers who would be interested in the same thing.
Well, I know actually through some of my work through the AAP, I know Howard County has an initiative right now partnering the schools and private pediatricians through telemedicine. So they actually and it's a pilot program, but working on making it more generalizable through the state, but basically it's a school health center where instead of trying to silo care, we'll actually connect back with the primary care pediatrician of that child, and that seems to be working well there. Hope maybe something like that would be possible in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Diep Tran, Vietnamese bilingual facilitator. Beside the work that I do here for the AACPS and the schools, I also help Vietnamese patients, mothers mostly, and of course elderly and so, at Fairfax Hospitals and Johns Hopkins. What really caused a great concern to me is I have observed in school kids with, mental disorders or, challenges in classrooms. We have case of, autism, and that was not what I knew when I grew up. But the Vietnamese now seem to have taken over or have symptoms of what we see in our societies here. So that's the educational part. On the side that I'm doing interpreting for the hospitals, Johns Hopkins and Fairfax and NIH, I observe young woman, Vietnamese woman, pregnant. One last case that really caused a lot of concern is she was pregnant 6 months, and after she had a sonogram a few months back, the child had no facial features. It's missing eye. So the mother was, it's her first child. The mother is really frightened, and she's, contemplating what you call abortion. And this is now approaching 22nd week, so it's kind of late. So what I'm trying to ask you is that these children we see in school, and then you as doctors, you probably have them in your office sometime because they live here. Just to raise your awareness, I don't think you have an answer, but what I'm trying to say is they eventually come to your office at one point or another because they live in this area, and they will end up in our schools because, parents will put them in first year or pre-K, whatever. I wonder if the doctors are aware of what's going on. I used to think that these young parents that came from Vietnam, immigrants and immigrants, still have the Agent Orange effects. That hasn't gone away. But what I also found out is that a lot of young people who didn't have English toil in the dark, day in and day out, working at nail salon, the manicure, now it becomes almost a factory. Average day for a mother, a young mother, is 10 to 12 hours. And I wasn't aware that the fact that the product they use is so toxic, the chemicals they use, that at one point I attended the Asian Pacific White House Summit a couple weeks ago at George Washington. It brought to the attention of Vietnamese doctors and high-ranking officers, the U.S. Department of Labor, Department of Health, that the working conditions of these young mother whose child that I witnessed, didn't have missing features, facial features, were actually in the nail salon. So this is something new. I think this is just this past decade or so. So I'd like to bring to your attention as doctors.
I think that goes back to the environment and what we were talking about earlier, those
Yes.
toxins. It's
And
a
they
very
will end up in
serious
your
thing.
office.
Mhm.
They're already in the schools.
Yeah.
Well, there is more awareness of this. I know that there's a movement towards, like, we started in New York, where they're talking about this. That there's there's this it's a sweatshop kind of environment for people that work on nails. So it's nail salons, and there's I don't think we as the public, just not pediatricians, but as a public, I don't think we're aware of how what these terrible conditions that these folks are working under. So I think that is a huge insight. But I don't know that there's a syndrome associated with. There's probably lots and lots of toxins that are being inhaled, but I don't know of a syndrome that's directly associated with the exposure to acetone or some of the other chemicals.
I'm not sure, but when I asked that young mother with that abnormal unborn baby yet, she most of them, 9 out of 10 women, young women, work in the manicure nail salons, factory.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hola. Yo soy madre de 3 hijos.
¿Puede ser en español?
I am the mother of 3 children. Y tengo un niño de 7 años con problemas.
And I have a 7-year-old that has problems.
He escuchado que estaban hablando de lidiar con los cambios en la casa, en la familia.
I heard you all when you were saying about the changes in the home for the children.
Mi pregunta es, cuando se hacen cambios, por ejemplo, estaban hablando de que
My question is, when we make changes,
el papá trabaja demasiado,
Dad works a lot.
el niño no duerme en la casa mucho.
He doesn't sleep a lot at home.
¿Qué debemos de hacer para poder no trabajar mucho
What should we do so that we don't have to work as much
y dedicarle tiempo a los niños?
and dedicate more time to the children?
Y cómo llevar la comida saludable.
And how to have the healthier foods.
Yeah, great questions. You know what? My wife and I asked the same questions.
Yep.
So, we both work too, and I think these are universal questions. I think the fact that you're asking these questions means that you're doing the right thing already. And I think just being aware that kids need our presence and our time is the key.
Una pregunta más.
One more question.
A mí me sucede,
The issue I have,
el niño va a la escuela,
he goes to school.
el niño representa en la escuela problemas.
He has issues my son has issues at school.
De la escuela a mí me llaman
They call me from school
que lo vaya a recoger porque no lo pueden controlar.
to go pick him up because they can't control him.
Entonces, ¿qué ayuda espero yo si en la escuela
What help should I expect if at school
no me lo pueden controlar?
they can't control him at school?
Me lo llevo a la casa,
I take him home
al peligro que me saquen de mi trabajo,
in danger that I get let go from my job
porque tengo que ir a lidiar con mi hijo.
because I have to leave work to go deal with his issues.
La confusión que tengo ahorita es,
So the confusion I have right now,
escuché que el factor puede ser alimentación
I heard, is the factor could be nutrition
o la rutina a diaria que
or
uno lleva.
the daily routine that he has or that we have.
Is he equally difficult to control at home?
Él es igual de difícil de controlar en la casa.
Sí.
Yes.
So in that situation, we wonder if there's more playing roles. The simple things are things like sleep. Nutrition is unlikely as a cause of behavioral problems. We think it's a contributor to a great extent. I think that if he's having that much difficulty on a regular basis in school, until we address the mental health concerns, and there's a variety of diagnoses that we come up with. There may be medication, counseling, and therapy. We're not going to solve the issue of you're being called away from work to pick them up. So it clearly needs an evaluation and therapy of some sort to figure out what it is, but it's hard to say without a specific diagnosis how we can make that easier for you at school or at home.
Exacto, y eso es lo que estoy esperando.
Exactly. And that's what I don't know.
A tener la oportunidad de que me den un diagnóstico
To
exacto.
have an opportunity to get a correct diagnosis for him.
Yeah, I think.
Do you have a pediatrician?
That's what I was.
¿Tiene un pediatra?
Sí.
Okay.
Yes.
Bring it to him or her.
Lléveselo,
Right.
hable con
This
él.
is appropriate to bring
Eso
into the
es algo
office.
apropiado para hablar con él.
Okay. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've had some great questions from the audience, and I just want to go ahead and bring us back to a close. We've talked about a lot of things today, some great things that have been happening in terms of early learning and how we can, as parents and educators, impact our youngest learners to have the bright future and the bright success by looking at the whole child. And I just wondered if, in closing, if you had any words of advice for early learning. You know, what would you say to young parents, educators of young children, parents with young children, for something that they could use and take with them as a kernel of wisdom?
So this is not a big revelation, but parents of young kids ask me what they can do to foster their development, and I tell them it's not Baby Einstein or any product. Just read to them is huge, and that would be my plug.
Right.
I agree completely. Turn the TV off and read. That's so interactive. The child is so much more interactive with you, and it really has been shown to be the stepping stone to educational success.
And also, just to emphasize something that Dr. Rice said earlier about family meals, and that whether that's breakfast or dinner, but that's just it's immunizing against depression, basically. So I think that I would recommend that highly.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you, our audience, for coming to this very important discussion that we hope is only the beginning of a partnership between our school system and our pediatric providers. And we're going to continue to do more together in the future. And I especially want to thank our panelists. It's such an important conversation that we're having here today. And you are such a critical part of our children's development in their lives that we think it's really an important partnership to have you here with us by our sides as we look towards creating the best possible outcomes for all of our children. We, again, want to thank you for coming. Our panelists will be up here for just a few moments if you had any additional questions that you wanted to talk to them about. And we hope to see you again in the future at these great discussions. Thank you.